Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something massive, a chronological journey through the entire history of Japan.
That's right. And it's a history that's really defined by these incredible, often very sudden transformations. How Japan absorbs these huge external shocks and then just redirects its whole society.
Yeah, we're going all the way back from the earliest hunter-gatherers, making pottery thousands of years ago, right up to modern Japan dealing with today's global shifts and, well, its own internal challenges.
And the key thing, I think, is that it's not a smooth curve. It's more like a series of resets. You see these long traditions, like, say, the idea of heroic sacrifice developing over centuries.
Mhm.
But then you see how these traditions clash and mix with foreign influences, whether that's Tang China's bureaucracy, Western gunboats, or, the American occupation after World War II.
And somehow, through all that, Japan manages to adapt, sometimes isolate, but always maintain this really distinct sense of identity.
Exactly. It nativizes these influences.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to really map out those key moments. We want to explore how that warrior spirit evolved, how that centralized feudal state managed total isolation for, 250 years?
Over 250 years, yeah.
And how external pressure, it seems, it's always external pressure kicked off radical modernization, which leads, in many ways, directly to the situation Japan faces today.
Right. So let's dive in. Where do we start? The very beginning.
Okay, earliest peoples. We're talking the Jōmon period first.
That's the one. And it lasts an incredibly long time. Think like 11,000 BC all the way down to maybe 300 BC.
Wow.
These were sophisticated hunter-gatherers, they had abundant resources, and crucially, they developed some of the world's earliest pottery. Really intricate rope-patterned stuff.
And those little clay figures, the dogu, they're fascinating.
Aren't they? They're not realistic at all. Often these really exaggerated features like huge eyes, almost like goggles, or sometimes they're clearly pregnant figures.
So what, fertility symbols?
Mm.
Or maybe deities?
That's the thinking. Fertility rites, maybe representing spirits, ancestors. It suggests this really deep connection to nature, to life cycles, an idea that you see echoing down through Japanese culture, really.
Definitely. But then this long Jōmon era gets, it gets disrupted.
It does. Around 1000 or 800 BC, you get the start of the Yayoi period, and this is the first really big external shock. New people arrive, probably from the Asian mainland, maybe Korea.
And they bring a whole new toolkit.
A revolutionary toolkit. Iron technology, weaving, silk. But the big one, the absolute game changer, is wet rice agriculture.
Right. That changes everything. You go from moving around, hunting and gathering, to needing permanent settlements. You need irrigation, organized labor.
Exactly. And that leads pretty quickly to hierarchies. Some communities get wealthier, more powerful. Land becomes the key resource.
And they also bring metal weapons, right? Iron.
Yes. Better farming tools, sure, which means more food, bigger population, but also better weapons.
No, more competition. More fighting over that precious rice land.
Pretty much. Warfare increases. You start seeing the emergence of powerful clans, the beginnings of a more organized hierarchical society fighting for control.
And that hierarchy really becomes visible in the next phase, the Kofun period, around the 3rd century CE.
Precisely. It's named after the Kofun, these massive burial mounds, huge structures built for the elite.
Some are enormous, aren't they?
Well,
Shaped like keyholes.
That's the classic shape. The biggest ones are over 400 meters long. Just think about the manpower the organization needed to build something like that. It screams centralized power.
And this is the era of Queen Himiko, the ruler of Yamatai.
The legendary Queen Himiko, a figure really shrouded in mystery, ruled in the 3rd century. The Chinese records say she used magic, sorcery, lived in a guarded palace rarely seen.
So powerful shaman queen, sort of.
Something like that. But she wasn't just locally powerful. She gained recognition from China, from the Wei dynasty. They called her a friend and ally.
Which must have given her huge prestige back home.
Immense leverage over rival clans. And the accounts of her burial, they say a huge mound was built, and over 100 attendants, men and women, were chosen to follow her to the grave.
Wow, that's stark. Shows a powerful belief in the afterlife, ancestor worship, elevating the ruler.
Absolutely. And that reverence for a central, almost divine authority, combined with that connection to the continent, really accelerates things into the Nara and Heian periods, starting around 710 CE.
Okay, so now we have a more unified state, Nihon.
Yes, the state is consolidating. They establish new capitals, first Nara, then Heian, modern Kyoto, in 794. And that move to Kyoto marks the beginning of this golden age of classical Japanese culture.
And they're looking at China again for models, right?
Yeah.
Especially for government.
Heavily influenced by Tang China. You see things like the Taika land reforms, the Taihu Code. These are attempts to create a centralized bureaucracy, laws, administration, and pretty much based on the Chinese template. They wanted order, legitimacy.
But then Japan does that very Japanese thing.
Yeah.
It starts to pull back.
It does. Power starts shifting internally. The imperial house itself begins to lose direct political clout. Aristocratic clans, especially the Fujiwara, become incredibly powerful.
How do they manage that?
Mostly through marriage politics. They systematically married their daughters into the imperial family, generation after generation, becoming regents, effectively controlling the throne from behind the scenes.
Okay, so power shifts away from the emperor to these court families.
Right. And this internal focus, these power struggles at court, actually leads to a major cultural turning point.
Which is?
They stopped sending official missions to China. These had been going on for centuries, bringing back knowledge, culture, technology. But in 894, they're halted. Sugawara no Michizane, a key figure, argued against it, partly due to the internal political situation and the decline of the Tang dynasty itself.
So kind of self-imposed isolation almost.
In a way, yes. And that decision accelerates the development of truly native Japanese forms. They start adapting things more deeply.
Like the writing system.
Exactly. Instead of just using complex Chinese characters, they develop kana, simpler phonetic scripts derived from Chinese characters. This makes writing much more accessible.
And that allows Japanese literature to blossom, right? Things like the Tale of Genji.
Precisely. Written by a court lady, Murasaki Shikibu, using kana, you get this explosion of native poetry, diaries, novels, often by women at court. So while the emperor's political power fades and the Fujiwara run the show, Japan is busy digesting centuries of Chinese influence and creating its own unique high culture in Heian.
Okay, so the court is focused on aesthetics, poetry. But meanwhile, out in the provinces, something else is stirring. Something that leads to the samurai.
Exactly. While the court in Kyoto was, refining its culture, its grip on the provinces weakened. Warrior families managing large estates started gaining real power on the ground.
Building up their own forces.
Right. This culminates in the Genpei War, a major conflict between the Pira and Minamoto clans. The Minamoto win, and their leader, Minamoto no Yoritomo, does something decisive around 1185.
He sets up a new government.
Yes. The military government, the shogunate, based not in Kyoto, but far away in Kamakura. He becomes the first shogun. This effectively sidelines the imperial court politically. Real power now rests with the military class, the samurai.
And this new samurai government gets tested almost immediately. A huge external shock.
A massive one. The Mongol invasions, 1274 and 1281. This is Kublai Khan, grandson of Genghis, now emperor of China's Yuan dynasty.
He wanted Japan to submit.
Demanded tribute. Japan, feeling pretty secure, basically ignored him, so he sent a fleet. The first one, 1274, was huge. Maybe 800 ships, 40,000 soldiers.
And the Mongols had advanced weaponry.
Yeah, gunpowder weapons like projectile bombs launched from catapults. They fought in tight formations. The Japanese samurai were used to more individual combat, archery, sword duels. It was a shock. The defenders at Akata Bay were outnumbered and initially overwhelmed.
But the invasion failed.
It did. Not because of the samurai primarily, but because a sudden storm hit, damaging the fleet and forcing a retreat. But Kublai Khan didn't give up.
He came back.
7 years later, 1281. An even bigger force. Some estimates say maybe 140,000 troops combined in 2 fleets.
Yeah.
Absolutely colossal.
And again, the weather.
Again, unbelievably, a massive typhoon just slammed into the Mongol fleet while it was anchored, preparing for the main assault. It utterly devastated them. Most ships sunk, tens of thousands drowned.
Wow. So twice saved by storms.
Exactly. And this is where the idea of the kamikaze, the divine wind, comes from. It was seen as proof that Japan was protected by the gods.
A really powerful founding myth for the nation's defense.
Incredibly powerful. And that idea, divine protection, linked to sacrifice and the will to resist, lodges itself deep in the Japanese military psyche. It echoes for centuries.
Okay, so the Mongols are repelled. But the Kamakura shogunate eventually falls apart anyway.
It does. Leads into the Muromachi period, which becomes increasingly unstable. Regional warlords, the daimyo, gain more and more power. This eventually descends into outright civil war, the Sengoku period, the Age of Warring States, constant conflict. The Shunnin War, starting in 1467, really kicks off the worst of it.
A century of chaos. How did they get out of that?
It took three remarkable figures. Oda Nobunaga, then his successor, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, managed through ruthlessness and brilliance to basically subdue most of the rival daimyo. They paved the way for the third great unifier,
Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Tokugawa Ieyasu. After winning the decisive Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, he establishes the Tokugawa shogunate, moving the capital to Edo, which is modern Tokyo. And this ushers in the Tokugawa or Edo period.
Long peace.
A long peace. From roughly 1600 to 1868. Over 250 years of stability. It's often called centralized feudalism.
How did they manage that stability after so much war? What were the control mechanisms?
It was brilliantly structured. The daimyo still ruled their own domains, their han, but the shogunate in Edo kept them on a very tight leash, mainly through a system called senkinkutei, or alternate attendance. Every daimyo had to spend every other year living in Edo under the shogun's watch.
So they had to maintain two expensive residences and travel back and forth.
Exactly. With a huge entourage of samurai. The cost was deliberately ruinous. It kept the daimyo financially drained, unable to afford rebellion, and crucially, their wives and heirs had to live in Edo permanently.
Hostages, basically.
High-status hostages, yes. Ensured loyalty. It was incredibly effective.
And alongside this internal control, they sealed the country off, the Sakoku policy.
That's the other pillar, the Closed Country Edict of 1635. Japanese people were forbidden from traveling abroad. If they left, they couldn't come back. Foreigners were largely barred.
Why such extreme isolation?
Primarily fear of instability, particularly from Christianity. European missionaries had been active, and the shogunate saw Christianity as undermining loyalty to the feudal hierarchy and potentially paving the way for foreign conquest.
Was there a specific event that triggered the full clampdown?
The Shimabara Rebellion in 1637-38 was a major factor. It involved peasants, many of them Christian converts, and some masterless samurai rode in. It was brutally suppressed, tens of thousands killed. After that, Christianity was completely outlawed, driven underground.
So who was allowed any contact?
Very limited. The Chinese could trade at Nagasaki, and the Dutch. Only the Dutch among Europeans, and they were confined to a tiny artificial island in Nagasaki Harbor called Daijimi. That was Japan's only window to the west for over 200 years.
Incredible. So peace and isolation. Did this lead to prosperity?
Paradoxically, yes, in many ways. Peace allowed the population to grow maybe 31 million people. Agriculture became more productive. Cities like Edo grew enormously. A vibrant urban culture developed.
But didn't this peace create problems for the ruling class, the samurai?
Absolutely. This is the Edo paradox. The samurai were at the top of a rigid class system. Samurai, farmers, artisans, merchants at the bottom. But with no wars to fight, the samurai became administrators, bureaucrats. They weren't allowed to engage in commerce, which Neo-Confucian ideology looked down upon anyway.
So they had status, but maybe not much cash.
Increasingly, yes. They had stipends, but often struggled to maintain the lifestyle expected of them. Meanwhile, the merchant class, the chonin, officially the lowest status, were getting richer and richer through trade, finance, urban growth.
So the social hierarchy didn't match the economic reality?
Not at all. Wealthy merchants often ended up lending money to impoverished samurai, even to the daimyo and the shogunate itself. It created this underlying tension and financial instability within the system.
And were there other cracks appearing? Peasant unrest?
Yes, by the mid-18th century, you start seeing more peasant uprisings, usually sparked by high taxes. The shogunate's finances were often strained, so despite the surface stability, the system was slowly eroding from within.
But literacy was high, you mentioned.
Remarkably high, especially in cities like Edo, maybe 80% literacy. So you had this educated populace, including many discontented samurai, aware of the internal contradictions. The whole system was stable, but also brittle, just waiting for a push.
And that push inevitably came from the outside again.
It came in the form of black ships, American warships. Commodore Matthew C. Perry, July 1853, sailing right into Edo Bay.
Not asking, but demanding.
Pretty much. Perry had orders to open Japan to trade and diplomatic relations, by force if necessary. His steam-powered, heavily armed ships were unlike anything Japan had seen. The shogunate knew they couldn't resist militarily.
They caved.
They had little choice. They signed the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854, opening 2 ports to American ships. This was followed by similar treaties with other Western powers.
And this humiliation, It broke the shogunate's authority.
It shattered it. Many powerful domains, especially in the southwest like Kyushu and Satsuma, saw this as proof of the shogunate's weakness. They rallied around the slogan, "Revere the emperor, expel the barbarians."
So they used the emperor as a rallying point against the shogun.
Exactly. It led to a brief but decisive civil war, the Boshin War. In 1868, the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown. Power was nominally restored to the young Emperor Meiji. This is the Meiji Restoration.
Meiji meaning enlightened rule, and enlightened it was in terms of modernization.
Astonishingly rapid modernization. The new leaders knew Japan had to modernize drastically to avoid being colonized like so much of Asia. Their motto was Fukoku Kishei, enrich the country, strengthen the military.
And they just dismantled the old system completely.
Radically. Abolish the feudal domains, replace them with prefectures, abolish the samurai class and their privileges, introduced a constitution, a parliament, though with limited power initially, universal conscription for the army, compulsory education.
Built railways, telegraphs, adopted Western technology, fashion, even the calendar.
Everything. They sent missions abroad to study Western institutions, industry, military methods, hired foreign experts. It was a top-down revolution, incredibly fast and comprehensive. They were determined to catch up with the West.
And part of catching up meant becoming an imperial power themselves.
That was seen as essential for resources and international prestige. Japan moved quickly to consolidate control over Hokkaido, the Ryukyu Islands, Okinawa, and then looked outward.
First Sino-Japanese War.
1894-95. A decisive victory over China, gaining Taiwan as a colony. Then, the really big one, the Russo-Japanese War, 1904-05.
Beating a major European power. That must have stunned the world.
It absolutely did. It announced Japan as a major player on the world stage. But these victories also had a profound impact internally, especially on military ideology.
How so? The idea of sacrifice again.
Exactly. The Russo-Japanese War, particularly the incredibly bloody siege of Port Arthur, saw immense casualties. General Nogi Marisuke, the commander there, became a national hero, despite, or maybe because of, the horrific losses under his command. His actions were held up as the epitome of Bushido loyalty, courage, willingness to die for the emperor.
And the state actively promoted this.
Very actively. It became part of the national curriculum, military training. This wasn't just about ancient warrior spirit. It was about cultivating fanatical loyalty and obedience for a modern, industrialized military machine. It was used to justify sacrifice, sometimes to mask tactical failures. They even emphasized things like bayonet charges the arme blanche to stress spirit over material factors.
This sets the stage for the increasing militarism of the Shuo era under Emperor Hirohito, starting in 1926.
It does. Japan becomes increasingly aggressive, driven by resource needs, ultranationalism, and the military's growing influence over government. You get the Mukden incident in 1931, staged by the army as a pretext to seize Manchuria.
Creating the puppet state of Manchukuo.
Right. Then the full-scale invasion of China begins in 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War. Atrocities like the Nanjing Massacre occur. The military is essentially running the country.
And Emperor Hirohito, what was his role? Did he approve?
The historical debate continues, but the consensus is that while perhaps initially reluctant about the scale of conflict, he ultimately sanctioned the key decisions, including the fateful decision to go to war with the United States in 1941.
Leading to Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Japan had incredible initial success, right?
Astonishing success in late 1941 and early 1942. They swept across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Their navy was powerful, their troops highly disciplined and motivated. They seemed invincible for a time.
But the tide turned. Midway.
Midway, June 1942, was the turning point in the Pacific. Japan lost 4 of its best aircraft carriers and, critically, hundreds of experienced pilots they simply couldn't replace quickly enough. The industrial might of the U.S. began to tell.
Guadalcanal, the island-hopping campaigns. Japan was pushed back. Resources dwindled, especially oil.
They were facing overwhelming material inferiority. Defeat became increasingly inevitable, though fiercely resisted. And it's in this context of desperation, in the final year or so of the war, that the Kamikaze strategy emerges on a large scale.
A return to that idea of the divine wind, but this time it's human sacrifice.
A horrifying culmination of that ideology. With conventional attacks becoming ineffective due to lack of trained pilots and advanced aircraft, they turned to suicide attacks as a tactic of last resort.
Using specially designed weapons, too, not just regular planes.
Yes. Things like the Oka, basically a piloted rocket bomb, minimal training needed, just enough fuel for a one-way trip. Built simply from available materials, it screams desperation.
And the Kaiten, the manned torpedo.
Even more terrifying, perhaps. A modified torpedo with a pilot inside, aimed at enemy ships. These weren't isolated acts. It was an organized military strategy involving thousands of young men sent to their deaths.
How effective was it really, tactically?
Psychologically, it was terrifying for Allied sailors. Tactically, the results were limited relative to the cost. Thousands of planes, thousands of pilots were lost. Sources suggest maybe only 14% scored a hit, and only about 8.5% of ships hit were actually sunk. It couldn't change the war's outcome.
And then the atomic bombs. Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
August 1945. Combined with the Soviet Union entering the war against Japan, it finally led Emperor Hirohito to intervene and announce Japan's unconditional surrender.
And even in defeat, that code of sacrifice persisted.
For some, yes. Several top military leaders, including Admiral Onishi, who had championed the kamikaze tactics, committed ritual suicide, seppuku, rather than face surrender and capture. A final, tragic adherence to that warrior ideal.
Surrender meant occupation. The first time ever Japan was occupied by a foreign power.
That's right. The Allied occupation, mostly American-led under General MacArthur Escape, Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers. It lasted from 1945 to 1952, and the initial phase was about radical reform.
A real New Deal for Japan, almost. What were the main goals?
Demilitarization and democratization, completely dismantling the structures that led to war. So war crimes trials for top leaders, disbanding the military entirely.
Political changes, too.
Huge political changes. The emperor was stripped of divinity, made a purely symbolic figurehead. Sovereignty was explicitly transferred to the people. A new constitution was drafted, the famous 1947 Constitution.
Well, with Article 9.
Exactly. Article 9 renounces war as a sovereign right and prohibits Japan from maintaining land, sea, or air forces. A fundamental break with the past. Plus, women got the vote, labor unions were encouraged.
And economically? Did they break up the big companies, the zaibatsu?
Initially, yes. SDP ordered the dissolution of those giant family-controlled conglomerates that had dominated the pre-war economy and supported militarism. And massive land reform, taking land from absentee landlords and giving it to the tenant farmers who actually worked it. This created a more stable, rural society.
So a real attempt to reshape Japan from the ground up. But then the focus shifted.
It did. Around 1947-48, you get the reverse course. The Cold War was heating up, American priorities changed. Suddenly, the goal wasn't just reforming Japan, but rebuilding it as a strong, stable, anti-communist ally in Asia.
So less focus on breaking up businesses, more on economic recovery.
Pretty much. The zaibatsu dissolution was scaled back. Many politicians and bureaucrats purged earlier for wartime activities were allowed back into public life by 1951. The emphasis shifted to getting the economy back on its feet.
And then the Korean War kicked things into high gear.
Absolutely. The Korean War, 1950-53, was a massive economic stimulus for Japan. The U.S. military needed supplies, trucks, uniforms, repairs, and Japan became the workshop. Huge amounts of money flowed in.
Providing the spark for the economic miracle.
Precisely. That wartime demand, combined with the reforms already in place, stable political leadership, mostly from the conservative Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, close cooperation between government and industry, and a focus on export-led growth. It all fueled incredible economic expansion.
For decades, right? Japan became an economic superpower.
Second largest economy in the world by the 1970s. And importantly, the benefits were widely shared. Living standards rose dramatically for almost everyone. A large, stable middle class emerged.
But that incredible growth couldn't last forever. The Heisei period, starting in 1989, things changed.
Dramatically. The bubble economy of the late 1980s wildly inflated stock and land prices burst spectacularly around 1989-90. What followed was the lost decade.
Or decades, really. Stagnation.
Yes, prolonged economic stagnation, deflation, difficulty adapting the economic model. And during this period, Japan also faced major natural disasters. The Kobe earthquake in 1995.
And then the triple disaster in 2011.
The Toshoku earthquake, the massive tsunami, and the subsequent Fukushima Daiichi nuclear meltdown. A profound national trauma, requiring immense recovery efforts on top of the existing economic challenges.
Which brings us pretty much up to the present, the Reiwa era, starting in 2019. What are the biggest challenges now?
Domestically, the overwhelming one is demographics. Japan has one of the world's oldest populations and one of the lowest birth rates.
A shrinking workforce supporting a growing number of elderly people.
Exactly. It puts enormous strain on the pension system, healthcare, the labor market, economic growth potential. It's a slow-motion crisis that successive governments have struggled to address effectively.
But externally, there's a new kind of pressure building again, security concerns.
Definitely. The regional security environment has shifted dramatically. China's military rise and assertiveness, North Korea's nuclear program, Russia's actions, these are felt very acutely in Japan.
You mentioned Chinese missiles landing in Japan's EEZ in 2022. That must have been a wake-up call.
A major one. It directly contributed to a significant policy shift announced shortly after. Japan declared it would acquire counterstrike capabilities, the ability to hit missile launch sites or bases in an adversary's territory if an attack is imminent.
That sounds like a big departure from the post-war pacifist stance.
It is. Alongside this, they announced plans to massively increase defense spending, aiming to reach 2% of GDP, roughly a 65% increase, by 2027. It reflects a fundamental reassessment of the security situation and a move towards a more proactive defense posture, arguably stretching the interpretation of Article 9.
So we've traced this incredible arc, from ancient isolation, absorbing Chinese culture, to feudal consolidation, then forced opening, frantic modernization, imperial ambition, catastrophic war, occupation, pacifism, economic miracle, stagnation, and now facing demographic decline and renewed external threats.
It really highlights Japan's unique historical pattern, that ability to absorb shocks, modernize rapidly, but always in a distinctively Japanese way. It's often described as non-Western and late-developing modernization.
And you mentioned that structure, the government, ruling party, business working together, that drove Meiji modernization and post-war growth.
Yes, that cohesive power structure, the ruling trinity in the post-war era, it's been incredibly effective at achieving national goals like economic growth. But that same cohesion can sometimes make it difficult to tackle deep-seated domestic problems that require fundamental change, like the demographic issue or political reform. We saw similar difficulties with reforms in the 1920s before the military took over.
A fascinating, complex history. So we've seen this nearly 1,000-year story involving sacrifice, isolation, adaptation, peace. The final thought then for you listening. Given these very real modern security threats and Japan's dramatic move towards counterstrike capabilities, how will it square this new military posture with Article 9, the constitutional renunciation of war? How does a nation balance its modern pacifist identity with these much older, deeply ingrained traditions of unified, disciplined national defense, even nationalism?
That tension between the post-war ideal and the historical and now contemporary pressures, that's the central question for Japan going forward.